Hey everyone, ready for a deep dive?
Always.
Well, today we're going to be exploring kind of the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Hmm.
Not the virus itself,
Yeah.
but kind of like the ripple effects.
Oh,
You
interesting.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like if an earthquake hits a building,
Uh-huh.
we're not just looking at like, the immediate damage,
Right.
but all the little cracks
Uh-huh.
and, the systemic issues that it may be exposed or worsened.
I like that, yeah.
So kind of looking at the systems and structures that
Yeah.
maybe made us a little vulnerable
That's a good way to put it.
to what happened.
Yeah.
And we've got some pretty interesting source material to work with today.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, we got some notes and early findings from a physician
Mm.
and systems analyst who is actually working on a book about this.
Wow. So we're getting like an exclusive sneak peek.
Exactly.
Nice.
So yeah, we're going to be uncovering some pretty thought-provoking stuff.
I'm excited.
I think so. Did you know that like trillions of dollars
Trillions.
changed hands during the pandemic?
Wow. I did not realize it was that much.
I know, it's crazy.
Yeah.
And did you ever stop to think about what the phrase safe and effective actually means?
Well, now that you mention it.
right.
yeah.
Like, what does that actually mean?
Hmm.
Anyway, before we get too ahead of ourselves,
Mhm.
we should probably say that
What's
we're not here to point fingers
right?
or anything like that,
Mm.
or like rehash all the arguments.
Yeah. No blame game here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not about that.
Yeah.
The goal is to just understand, like,
Sure.
how things unfolded,
Right.
what we can learn from it
Yeah.
for the future.
Absolutely.
So where do we even begin with all this?
Well, I think a good place to start is to just like look at the damage,
Okay.
the tangible fallout from the pandemic.
So, like, what specifically are we talking about here?
Well, for starters, we got economic damage, like I said, trillions of dollars,
Right.
not to mention all the setbacks in education and the mental health crisis that's still unfolding.
It's like we're still feeling the aftershocks.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying?
Years later.
Totally.
And our source material doesn't, like, try to downplay any of this.
Okay.
It straight up talks about rising rates of addiction, obesity, even excess deaths.
Excess deaths, what does that mean?
Like, deaths that are above and beyond what would be expected,
Oh, wow.
based on historical trends.
Okay.
And these trends are continuing, even now.
So it's like the pandemic shadow is still looming.
Right, exactly.
That's pretty sobering.
And what I find really striking is, like,
Yeah.
it doesn't seem like there's much of a push to, like, really investigate these issues.
You mean like why these things are happening?
Yeah.
Especially the ones that might be tied to,
To what?
decisions that were made during the pandemic?
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it makes you wonder about accountability.
It really does.
Yeah.
It makes me think about how we view risk and responsibility when it comes to public health.
Yeah, for sure.
Speaking of which, the source material mentions this thing called an inverted belief paradigm.
Inverted belief paradigm.
Yeah.
What is that?
That's what I was wondering.
Okay.
Sounds kind of sci-fi, don't you think?
It does, yeah.
What does that even mean?
Well, think about it this way.
Okay.
Remember that slogan, nobody is safe until everyone is safe.
Oh, yeah. I remember that.
On the surface, it sounds kind of nice, right?
It does sound compassionate.
Right.
Yeah.
But when you actually think about it,
Yeah.
it kind of promotes this black and white thinking
Okay.
that disregards individual risk.
So, like, everyone has to conform to one way of thinking.
Exactly.
Interesting.
And it discourages critical thinking and
Yeah.
rational decision-making.
Yeah.
It's like saying you can't go swimming until every single person on Earth knows how to swim perfectly.
Right.
It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Now, that's a good analogy.
Just like, come on, get rid.
This reminds me of something in the source material.
What's that?
The author, the physician, talks about seeing young patients dying
Oh, wow.
from side effects that were just dismissed as, like, rare
Real?
and justified as, like, the price we have to pay.
That's heavy.
It's chilling.
Yeah.
It's a chilling example of how this kind of thinking can play out
Right.
in real-life situations.
Absolutely.
Especially when you consider that for healthy people under 50,
Yeah.
the infection fatality rate of SARS-CoV-2
Okay.
was actually lower than the flu.
Lower than the flu.
Yeah,
Huh. I don't think a lot of people realize that.
I think you're right.
Wow.
And this is where that phrase, safe and effective,
Yeah.
kind of starts to break down.
I see what you mean. Yeah.
Because no medical intervention can really be
Can be what?
universally safe and effective for everyone.
Oh, wait. Yeah.
It's like assuming one size fits all when it comes
Yeah.
to medical treatment.
Exactly.
But billions of doses of
Yeah.
these new therapies were given out. So even if a small percentage have serious side effects.
Yeah,
That could mean millions affected, right?
potentially.
Yeah.
And that's something this physician and systems analyst really emphasizes.
Okay.
We need to start thinking about those long-term implications.
More than just the immediate benefits.
Exactly.
All right, you got me hooked.
All right.
Let's look at these clinical trials and see what we find.
Okay, let's do it.
I'm ready.
This is where things get really interesting.
Oh, boy.
Buckle up. So you know how we were talking about safe and effective?
Yeah.
You'd think, with a phrase like that,
Right.
the trials for these new therapies would have to be, like, super thorough.
You would think.
Right.
Uh-huh.
Turns out, not so much.
Okay, I'm listening.
What kind of issues are we talking about?
Well, lay it on me.
Well, for one thing,
Yeah.
they were short,
Short meaning.
like, in terms of time.
Oh, yeah.
Like, how can you really know the long-term effects of something
Right.
if you only study it for a little while?
It's like judging a book by its cover.
Totally.
Or the first chapter.
Yeah, exactly.
You're not getting the whole story.
Right. And
Yeah.
on top of that,
Uh-oh.
they lost their control groups.
Wait, what?
Yeah, early on in the trials.
What does that even mean?
So basically, they ended up giving the actual therapy
Hmm.
to the people who were supposed to be getting the placebo.
Hold on. So how does that even work?
I know, right?
That messes up the whole point of a trial, doesn't it?
You would think.
Yeah.
But the thinking was that everyone should have access to it.
To the therapy.
Yeah, if it was potentially beneficial. So, but that made it
Yeah.
basically impossible to compare the long-term outcomes
No, okay.
of those who got it versus those who didn't.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's like trying to figure out if a plant grew taller
Okay.
because of a special fertilizer,
Uh-huh.
but then you end up giving the fertilizer to all the plants. You
Oh.
can't tell what made the difference.
Right, exactly.
That's a mess.
So basically we're left with a
Wow.
lot of unanswered questions about what could happen later on
Got it.
down the line.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And to add to that,
Okay. What else?
there were some important safety studies that weren't even done
Before they were widely distributed?
before they were widely distributed.
Wow.
Yeah, crazy, right?
Like what kind of studies?
Well, things like carcinogenicity,
Carcinogenicity meaning?
whether something could cause cancer,
Oh, okay.
and genotoxicity,
Weaning.
which looks at whether something can damage your genes.
Oh, wow. So pretty important stuff.
Yeah, and they also didn't really thoroughly study how those lipid nanoparticles,
Those are the things that carry the mRNA.
yeah,
Okay.
actually behave in the body.
It's like they skipped some chapters in the safety manual
That's a good way to put it.
and just hoped for the best.
You got it.
Yeah.
And remember that whole inverted belief paradigm we were talking about?
Yeah.
It played a role here, too.
How so?
Well, people just kind of assumed
Right.
that because these therapies were authorized for emergency use,
Mhm.
they had to be safe.
Even without all the usual safety checks.
Yeah, even without all the usual safety checks.
Hmm.
It's pretty wild.
And we can't forget that even those short-term trials
Yeah.
had some warning signs, right?
Right, they did.
Like red flags.
Yeah, the source material mentions Dr. Claire Craig.
Okay.
She found that the chance of having a serious adverse event
Okay.
from the therapy
Yeah.
was actually higher
Then what?
than the chance of it preventing severe COVID.
Wow. So it's riskier than it is beneficial.
Well, in the short term, yeah, according to this analysis,
That should have raised some eyebrows.
you would think
Yeah.
it's mind-boggling
It really is.
that those signals weren't taken more seriously.
So let's talk about the long-term harm then.
Okay.
What are the potential mechanisms at play here?
Well, those lipid nanoparticles,
Yeah.
remember,
Mhm.
they don't just stay in one place.
Right. To travel
throughout the body,
throughout the body.
delivering the mRNA.
Delivering the mRNA to different organs. Which is different from like
Yeah.
a natural respiratory infection.
Because that mostly stays in the lungs and respiratory system.
Exactly.
Right.
So we're talking about a much wider impact
I mean, we initially thought.
than we initially thought.
Yeah.
And that raises concerns about,
Yeah.
potential unintended consequences.
Unintended consequences in different parts of the body.
Like what if these nanoparticles trigger autoimmune reactions?
Autoimmune reactions, meaning...
Like where your immune system starts attacking your own cells?
No, wow.
Or what about the possibility of contaminants in those formulations?
Right, yeah.
What could those be doing long term?
It sounds like we have a lot of what-ifs
We do, unfortunately.
hanging in the air.
Because those long-term studies,
Yeah.
they just weren't there
From the beginning.
from the beginning, yeah.
Making it harder to figure out what's going on now.
What's going on now?
Exactly.
Are we essentially conducting a massive experiment on the population without fully understanding the risks?
That's a tough question.
It is a tough
A
question.
lot of people are grappling with it.
So where do we go from here?
That's the million-dollar question.
What can we do to make sure something like this doesn't happen again?
And that's exactly what we're going to talk about in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, looking forward to it. So much to think about.
Yeah, no kidding, huh?
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
For sure.
The pandemic's long-term impacts, the inverted belief paradigm, and
Yeah.
those long-term safety questions surrounding these new therapies.
It's a lot.
It's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, definitely heavy stuff.
But I think
Yeah.
the point here isn't to just dwell on the negative.
Right.
Right. It's to understand what happened
And learn from it.
so we can create a better path forward.
Absolutely.
So let's talk solutions.
Okay, I like it.
How do we rebuild trust in a system
Yeah.
that honestly feels pretty shaken right now?
Well, I think a big part of it is how we think about and communicate risk.
Okay.
It can't just be those slogans anymore.
Like safe and effective.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We need transparency.
What does that look like in practice?
Well, we need to see the data,
Uh-huh.
understand the limitations of the studies,
Okay.
and have open conversations about the potential harms.
Even if they're rare.
Even if they're rare.
It's like trust but verify.
I like that.
Right.
Yeah.
We need to be informed participants in our own health decisions.
Not just taking everything at face value.
You're not just blindly following what we're told.
Exactly.
Be critical thinkers.
Challenge those assumptions.
Demand evidence.
Blind faith isn't science.
It's not good for public health either.
No, not at all.
The source material talks about revisiting the precautionary principle.
Ah, yes, the precautionary principle.
Oh, it's that exactly.
Basically, common sense when it comes to risk. If there's a chance something could be harmful,
Yeah.
even if we don't have all the evidence yet.
We should err on the side of caution.
Exactly.
It's like looking both ways before you cross the street.
Even if you don't see any cars coming.
Makes sense to me.
Right.
But some people might say being overly cautious could slow things down.
Oh, for sure, especially in an emergency.
Yeah.
That's a valid concern.
So it's all about finding the balance then.
Finding that sweet spot between action and caution.
But how do we make these changes happen?
Where do we even start?
That's what I'm wondering.
Well, it starts with each of us
Okay.
taking responsibility for our own health,
Doing our own research,
seeking out diverse perspectives.
not just relying on one source of information.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to have those tough conversations.
Even if they're uncomfortable or challenge what we think we know.
Exactly.
And we can't forget about accountability.
Right.
We need to demand transparency
From those institutions.
from public health agencies, regulatory bodies, the whole medical establishment
Yeah, we need to push for investigations into those long-term effects.
of these new therapies.
And make sure any future medical interventions go through rigorous safety testing.
No more cutting corners.
No more cutting corners.
It feels like we're at a crossroads.
Yeah, we are.
The pandemic has shaken things up,
Uh-huh.
but maybe it's also given us a chance to rebuild.
To create something better.
Exactly.
More resilient.
What's so fascinating to me is that this isn't just about medicine or public health.
No, it's bigger than that.
It's about how we function as a society.
Exactly.
Do we value transparency and open discussion?
Are we willing to admit when we're wrong?
To learn from our mistakes?
Those are the big questions.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with this.
Okay.
What role are you going to play
Mm,
in building this more resilient future?
that's a good question.
Will you engage in those critical conversations?
Will you demand better from those institutions?
These are the questions we need to keep asking ourselves.
I hope you'll keep exploring these ideas.
Thanks for joining us.